The wind howled across the streets of Chicago, swirling the first flakes of snow into a dizzying dance that reflected the chaos in Lila Harper's mind. Christmas Eve had always carried a quiet magic for her, a fleeting sense of warmth and possibility, but tonight it was different. She huddled on the icy bench at the bus stop on Michigan Avenue, her coat threadbare, a thin scarf barely shielding her from the frigid December air. Around her, the city gleamed with opulent holiday decorations. Glittering storefronts at Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue, enormous trees shimmering with lights, and passers-by who laughed and carried bags stuffed with presents, oblivious to the bitter cold and the lives of those around them. Lila clutched her bag of groceries, the torn handles cutting into her fingers, as she thought about the rent she hadn't been able to pay for 3 months, the medical bills for her mother that kept piling up, and the waitress job that barely covered food. Every cheerful display on the avenue seemed to mock her. She pressed her gloves tighter over her fingers, her teeth chattering as she exhaled, watching her breath form little clouds that vanished into the night. The bus was late, as usual, and every passing cab splashed icy slush onto the sidewalk, soaking her shoes. She had come here on a whim, hoping to catch the bus to her mother's apartment, but now she wondered if she would even make it home. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden voice, calm but commanding, that cut through the wind like a blade. "Excuse me, miss." Lila looked up, blinking against the harsh glow of the streetlights, to see a tall man standing before her. His presence seemed almost unreal, as if he had stepped out of a different world entirely. He wore a cream-colored overcoat that looked impossibly expensive, the kind of garment that seemed to repel cold rather than suffer it, and his dark hair was perfectly coiffed despite the blizzard. Beside him stood a small girl, maybe 5 or 6, bundled in a black coat and matching hat. Her eyes, large, blue, and piercing, fixed on Lila with an intensity that made her stomach twist. The child didn't fidget or smile, she simply stared. "I know this is unusual," the man said, his tone smooth yet urgent, "but I need your help, and I'm willing to pay you." Lila felt her heart skip a beat. He reached into his coat and pulled out a stack of bills, crisp, bundled with rubber bands. The sight made her knees weak. She had never seen so much money in her life, $10,000, right there in his hand, like it had been conjured from thin air. Lila blinked, unsure whether to feel anger, fear, or disbelief. Why me?" she managed, her voice trembling against the wind. "Because," he said, glancing down at the child, "Clara chose you." And for a moment, even amid the noise of the city and the bite of the cold, Lila felt the world tilt on its axis, as if fate itself had stopped to speak directly to her. The bus finally groaned into sight, yet she couldn't move. Something about the man, his daughter, the urgency in his voice, rooted her to the spot. The decision, impossibly, terrifyingly, already seemed halfway made. Lila's mind raced as she stared at the stack of money Dominic Sterling held out, the crisp $100 bills a promise of relief she had never imagined possible. Her fingers itched to reach for them, but a wave of disbelief made her hesitate. Who was this man, really? Why her? And more importantly, why would a stranger want her to step into a stranger's home, into the life of a child she didn't know? Dominic's calm, almost clinical gaze, however, conveyed a seriousness that made hesitation feel almost disrespectful. "I know it sounds absurd," he said, noticing her hesitation. "But I'm desperate. My daughter, she hasn't spoken since the accident." Lila's chest tightened. The city's festive chaos, the shouting shoppers, the blaring car horns, all faded as she listened to him. She watched Dominic gently adjust the girl's scarf, his movements tender, precise, revealing a side of him that contrasted sharply with the cold, commanding presence he had when speaking to Lila. Clara's eyes never wavered, fixating on Lila with something that made her heart ache, a mixture of hope, fear, and curiosity. Dominic spoke again, his voice dropping into a near whisper that somehow carried over the hum of traffic and the crunch of snow beneath the bus tires. "She needs someone. Just for Christmas. Someone who can give her stability, warmth, a sense that life can be safe again." Lila swallowed hard, her mind spinning. Stability. That was something she had never had, never truly felt. Her own childhood had been a patchwork of foster homes, financial struggles, and abandoned dreams. The thought of being invited into this strange, fragile world, the possibility of helping a child who had been trapped in grief, ignited something in her. It was terrifying, and yet she couldn't look away. The wind picked up, flinging snow across the street, making Dominic's coat shimmer like some ethereal armor. "I'll pay you $10,000, he continued, placing the stack of bills on the bench beside her. "You'd stay in my home, be part of our little family for 8 days. Meals, bedtime, Christmas morning. Just be there." Lila's fingers twitched nervously. 8 days. $10,000. That was more than enough to cover rent, her mother's medical bills, and groceries for months. But nothing in life came free, especially not offers like this, and Lila had learned the hard way that desperation could be dangerous. "Why me?" she asked again, her voice barely audible over the wind. Dominic looked at Clara, who gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, but powerful in its conviction. "She chose you," he repeated. And for reasons she couldn't fully understand, Lila felt the pull of something bigger than herself, something that whispered of hope and purpose. The bus engine roared closer, a mechanical reminder of the life she could return to, her cold apartment, her unpaid bills, her endless struggle, but the thought of walking away felt impossibly hollow. As Dominic's gaze held hers, Lila realized that her life, which had always felt like a series of missteps and bad luck, was about to pivot in a way she had never imagined. And somewhere deep inside, a small, frightened part of her wondered if this was chance or destiny. The snow fell harder now, dusting the money with tiny white crystals, and Lila's heart raced, teetering on the edge of decision, suspended between fear, hope, and a strange, unspoken longing for something she didn't yet have words for. The black Mercedes glided through the city streets, its tires whispering against the snow-slicked asphalt, carrying Lila, Dominic, and Clara toward the sprawling Sterling estate in Lake Forest. Lila stared out the window, mesmerized and terrified in equal measure. The city lights blurred past like fleeting memories, streaks of gold and white reflecting off the wet roads, while her thoughts tumbled chaotically. What had she agreed to? 8 days. $10,000. Pretend to be part of a family that wasn't hers, stepping into a home that had been frozen in grief since Isabella's death. And yet, something about Clara's unwavering gaze in the bus stop lingered in her mind, haunting and compelling. The little girl had looked at her as though she were the only anchor in a stormy sea, and for reasons Lila couldn't fully articulate, she had answered that silent plea. The Mercedes slowed as they approached the long, circular driveway of the mansion. It was impossible not to feel dwarfed by its grandeur. High stone walls, frosted with a delicate layer of snow, framed a sprawling facade with towering windows that gleamed like the eyes of the house itself, watching their every movement. Lila's pulse quickened. She had never stepped inside a place like this, and a wave of self-doubt washed over her. Would she belong here? Could she even survive the scrutiny of a billionaire's life? Dominic, sensing her anxiety, offered a small, reassuring smile, though it didn't quite reach the solemnity in his eyes. Clara sat silently between them in the back seat, her small hand finally finding Lila's, squeezing it with a delicate grip that sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. For the first time, Lila realized that this wasn't just a test for her, it was a lifeline for this child. As the car rolled past the wrought iron gates, the snow intensified, falling in thick, soft flakes that muffled the world and lent a surreal quality to the estate. Inside, the house was a cathedral of elegance. Marble floors that reflected the soft glow of chandeliers, massive windows dressed with silk drapes, and towering Christmas trees adorned with perfectly arranged ornaments. Yet, beneath the beauty, Lila sensed a hollow absence. There were no personal touches, no photographs or mementos to remind anyone of the woman who had once filled the home with warmth and laughter. It was as though Isabella's memory had frozen the house in time, leaving only the ghosts of what had been. Dominic led her up a grand staircase, his voice calm but urgent, explaining that her room was next to Clara's. "It will help maintain the illusion," he said, as if reading her thoughts. The guest room was enormous, more like a suite than anything she had known, with a four-poster bed draped in velvet, a marble ensuite bathroom, and designer clothes laid out on the bed as if anticipating her arrival. Lila's stomach twisted at the opulence, feeling simultaneously out of place and strangely empowered. She couldn't deny that the money was tempting, but it was more than that. This was a chance to step into a story bigger than her own, to touch a life that had been trapped in sorrow, and perhaps, in some fragile, unspoken way, to touch her own soul. Clara approached quietly, clutching a small, well-worn stuffed rabbit. Lila bent down, offering a gentle smile. The little girl's eyes held secrets, pain, and a cautious hope that mirrored the storm of snow outside. Lila knew, in that moment, that nothing in her life had prepared her for this, yet somehow she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The air in the room felt charged, heavy with expectation and unspoken questions. And as Lila took a tentative step toward the bed, the snow continued to fall outside, soft and insistent, covering the world in white and signaling the start of a Christmas neither of them would ever forget. She was about to enter a house frozen in grief, carrying with her the fragile hope that 8 days could change everything, not just for Clara, but for herself as well. Lila Harper stepped cautiously into the room adjoining Clara's, her heart pounding in rhythm with the muffled ticking of a grand clock in the hall. Clara sat cross-legged on her bed, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly, the soft fur pressed against her cheek as if it were the only anchor in a world that had grown too vast, too cold, since her mother's death. The girl's eyes lifted slowly, hesitant and wary, scanning Lila as though measuring her worth, testing her very presence. Lila swallowed hard, aware of the fragile silence that hung between them like fragile glass, ready to shatter with the wrong word, the wrong gesture. "Hi, Clara," she said softly, lowering herself to sit at the edge of the bed. "I'm Lila. I want you to know I'm not here to replace your mom. Nobody could do that. But maybe, for a little while, we could be friends. Would that be okay?" Clara didn't respond at first, her small body tense, shoulders raised as if bracing for disappointment. The room was quiet except for the subtle rustle of the blanket as the girl shifted. Lila's chest ached as she watched Clara's hesitant gaze, the way her tiny hands gripped the rabbit with a fierce intensity, revealing the depth of her inner struggle. Slowly, the corners of her lips twitched, a faint hint of curiosity piercing the wall of grief. Lila reached out gently, allowing Clara to decide whether to meet the touch. To her surprise, the girl's hand tentatively met hers, fingers entwining in a silent agreement, a fragile connection forming in the most delicate of ways. Lila felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief and fear, knowing how delicate this bond was, how quickly it could be shattered. She took a deep breath. "Can you show me your room?" she asked softly, trying to keep her voice steady. Clara's eyes flickered with the smallest spark of recognition, and she slid off the bed, leading Lila through the connecting door. The room was a wonderland of pastel pinks and creams, a princess's dream, with toys neatly arranged as though frozen in time. But what drew Lila's attention, her breath catching in her throat, was the wall beside the bed, a canvas of crayon drawings, dozens of them, each depicting 3 figures holding hands, a tall man, a small girl, and a woman with long dark hair. In some, they stood before a house, in others, by a Christmas tree. In one, they were at the beach. Each image bore the same hauntingly perfect composition, an echo of Clara's longing and her memory of the mother she had lost. "Is that your mom?" Lila asked gently, her finger tracing the outlines of the drawn figure. Clara nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, glimmering like a frozen drop in the soft lamplight. Lila's heart clenched as she whispered, "She was beautiful. I can tell she loved you so much." Clara's small arms suddenly wrapped around Lila's waist, pressing her face into Lila's coat, shaking with silent sobs that spoke louder than words ever could. Lila held her tightly, feeling the depth of the child's grief and the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. For the first time, it was no longer about the $10,000, no longer about survival or opportunity. It was about the fragile life before her, a heart broken yet reaching desperately for warmth. They stayed like that for a long while, the muffled wind outside blending with Clara's quiet sobs, until finally, her breathing slowed, her small body relaxing against Lila's. Lila gently guided her to bed, helping her into pajamas, brushing her hair, tucking her in with care, and as she turned to leave, Clara's hand shot out, pointing to a rocking chair in the corner. "Stay," her eyes seemed to plead. Lila sank into the chair, watching as Clara's lashes fluttered closed, the rabbit tucked under her chin. And in that silent moment, Lila realized that she had crossed a threshold. She was no longer merely a visitor in this home. She had become a part of something fragile, sacred, and terrifying, a chance to help a child breathe again, and perhaps, to allow herself to hope for a life she had never dared to imagine. Lila remained in the rocking chair long after Clara's steady breathing confirmed she had fallen asleep, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the armrest, mind spinning with the weight of what she had just witnessed. Dominic Sterling appeared silently in the doorway, his expression a mix of vulnerability and restraint, the kind of raw emotion rarely glimpsed by anyone. "She hasn't let anyone comfort her like that since Isabella died," he whispered, almost afraid to speak louder, as though breaking the fragile spell would undo the small miracle she had allowed. Lila's gaze met his, and she saw the sorrow etched into every line of his handsome face, the quiet desperation of a father who had tried everything and failed. "Tell me about her," Lila asked softly, her voice carrying genuine curiosity and empathy. Dominic leaned against the doorframe, a shadow of grief passing over his features. "Isabella was a photographer," he began, voice thick with remembered warmth. "She found beauty everywhere, in abandoned buildings, in the faces of strangers, in the little finger paintings Clara made. She had a way of turning the ordinary into something magical. She made the world feel alive." His lips trembled as he continued, the memory of loss raw and immediate. "She was driving home from a gallery show when a drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly. Clara was in the back seat. She survived physically, but she hasn't spoken a word since that night. Selective mutism, the doctors say, triggered by trauma. They tell me she'll speak again when she feels safe." Lila's chest tightened. She looked at the sleeping child, seeing the tiny rise and fall of her chest, the delicate flutter of her lashes, and understood just how heavy this grief was, how tightly Clara clung to the memory of the mother she had lost. "Maybe she doesn't need to let go," Lila murmured, her mind turning over the fragile possibilities. "Maybe she just needs permission to keep loving her mother while living her own life." Dominic's gaze softened, lingering on Lila, a mix of admiration and worry in his eyes. You've only been here a few hours, and yet she's responding to you in ways she never did to nannies, therapists, even my own family. I don't know if I can ask you to stay beyond the 8 days, but I see the connection. And it terrifies me because it could vanish tomorrow if you leave." Lila's stomach churned at the weight of his words. She had come for the money, for survival, but now she was tangled in something far larger, the fragile life of a child, the shattered heart of a father, and the weight of responsibility she had never imagined. Dominic took a cautious step closer, his hand pressing something into hers, a small velvet box. "I want you to understand," he said quietly. "This isn't about money. This is about family, about something we both need, and about the life Clara deserves. You've done what an army of professionals couldn't. In 2 days, you've reached her." Lila held the box, heart hammering, realizing that this gesture, small, silent, and yet monumental, was more than a symbol. It was trust. It was desperation. It was hope. And she knew, deep down, that whatever she decided next, there would be no turning back. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the snow in thick sheets against the windows, a white veil separating the world from the fragile sanctuary within. Inside, a father's love and a child's fragile hope were intersecting with the unexpected presence of a woman who, until tonight, had been invisible to the world. Lila's hands shook as she opened the box just enough to see the simple silver band inside, a memory of Isabella, a tether to the past, and a silent plea for the future. And in that moment, Lila understood something fundamental. This wasn't about pretending, it wasn't about money, it wasn't even about her. It was about survival, connection, and the courage to step into a life that had already begun to need her more than she realized. Christmas morning arrived with a fragile stillness that seemed almost unreal, the kind of quiet that only fell in houses where anticipation and longing hung heavily in the air. Lila Harper awoke to find Clara standing beside her bed, still in her pajamas, holding a small, carefully wrapped present with trembling hands. The little girl's eyes shone with a mixture of pride and hesitation, as though offering something precious for fear of it being refused. Lila sat up slowly, her heart tightening at the sight, and took the gift. Inside was a hand-drawn picture of Lila seated in the rocking chair, with Clara tucked into bed, her stuffed rabbit by her side, a tiny, imperfect sketch that nevertheless radiated warmth and love. At the bottom, written in a child's shaky hand, were the words, "Thank you." Lila's throat tightened as tears pricked the corners of her eyes. "Did you make this for me?" she whispered. Clara nodded, a shy, tentative smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Lila held the paper close, feeling its weight, not in material value, but in the fragile bond it represented. In that moment, the mansion around her, the towering Christmas trees, the gleaming marble floors, the polished silverware waiting in the dining room, faded into insignificance. Everything that mattered was here, in the small, trembling hand of a girl who had just allowed herself to be seen. As Lila and Clara shared that quiet moment, Dominic Sterling appeared in the doorway, dressed in a cashmere sweater and slacks, his presence calm but imbued with an undercurrent of restrained emotion. "Merry Christmas," he said softly, his voice catching slightly as he observed the scene before him. Lila noticed the subtle tremor in his jaw, the way his eyes softened at the sight of his daughter offering her heart in this simple, silent way. The morning unfolded with a delicate rhythm, unwrapping gifts, laughter cautiously edged with hesitation, and the fragile warmth of a family beginning to take shape. Dominic had clearly prepared gifts for Lila as well, a gesture of generosity that surprised her, though she tried not to let her emotions betray her. Jewelry, clothing, and small luxuries were laid out, yet her attention remained fixed on Clara, who was now experimenting with the professional camera Dominic had given her, the one Isabella had once intended for her daughter. Clara's small fingers moved carefully over the controls, pressing the shutter with reverence, capturing moments of light and shadow that reflected both innocence and a burgeoning curiosity about the world. Lila watched, astonished, as Clara photographed the tree, the ornaments, and even the way sunlight streamed through the massive windows, bathing the room in a soft glow. "She's capturing what she lost," Dominic murmured beside Lila, voice barely above the whisper of the wind outside. "She's learning to see again." Lila nodded, understanding the truth in his words. This was more than a Christmas morning. It was a fragile reclaiming of life, memory, and hope. And in that fragile reclamation, Lila realized that her presence here was no longer transactional. She wasn't just the temporary caretaker, the woman paid to fill a void. She was part of the unfolding story of healing, of rediscovery, and of the subtle yet profound ways that love could seep into lives long thought frozen. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and endless, blanketing the world in white, and inside, in the warm glow of the Sterling estate, a new chapter began, delicate, unsteady, but brimming with possibility. The evening air was sharp as Lila Harper followed Dominic Sterling through the ornate halls of the Sterling estate, the house now alive with a low hum of conversation, laughter, and the clinking of fine crystal. The Christmas party had begun, and the gathering was a showcase of wealth, privilege, and meticulously curated appearances. Guests in glittering gowns and tailored suits moved through the mansion with practiced elegance, exchanging polite smiles and carefully measured words, oblivious to the storm of snow that raged outside. Lila's pulse raced. She felt acutely out of place in her simple dress, a newcomer navigating a world that had never been hers. Yet Dominic's presence beside her was reassuring, a quiet anchor amidst the whirl of unfamiliar faces and whispered conversations. He introduced her as Clara's special friend, someone who had been helping them through the holidays, and Lila felt the subtle weight of every gaze upon her, evaluating, judging, measuring her worth against the gilded backdrop of wealth. Clara trailed closely, her camera swinging from her small neck, eyes wide and observant. She moved carefully, capturing candid moments of the partygoers, unbothered by the stares that occasionally flicked her way. Through the lens, she seemed to reclaim her voice in a silent, profound manner, documenting gestures of intimacy, fleeting smiles, and private conversations that others overlooked. Lila watched in quiet awe as the girl, who had not spoken in 2 years, began to assert herself, letting the camera serve as both shield and expression. Dominic noticed it too, his eyes softening, his jaw loosening from the tension he carried throughout the day. "She's finding her words in another way," he murmured, almost to himself, as he observed Clara from a distance. The party continued, filled with subtle challenges for Lila. Questions about her background, curious glances that tested her composure, and conversations that skimmed the surface of a life she had never led. Yet, she met each moment with quiet dignity, her warmth toward Clara evident in every interaction. The little girl occasionally glanced at Lila for reassurance, a small nod or smile from Lila enough to guide her through the social maze. The night was a test of endurance, patience, and subtle navigation, an immersion into a world of luxury that contrasted sharply with Lila's own, but one she learned to inhabit without losing herself. As midnight approached, the energy of the party shifted, guests departing with farewells and lingering glances, leaving behind the warmth of the house and the soft glow of Christmas lights reflecting off the snow outside. Lila helped Clara prepare for bed, the ritual now familiar, pajamas, brushing teeth, tucking in, the stuffed rabbit position just so. As she placed Clara's hand over her heart and then her own, the silent exchange spoke volumes, trust, affection, and a bond that had formed far beyond words. Lila felt the full weight of responsibility settle over her, tempered with a profound sense of connection. In the quiet aftermath of the party, standing beside the glowing Christmas tree and listening to the muffled echoes of departing guests, she realized that this family, broken, grieving, and fragile, had begun to accept her. And in return, she had found something unexpected: belonging, purpose, and the subtle thrill of stepping into a life that, for the first time, seemed to need her not just for survival or money, but for love, courage, and the healing of hearts that had been left unspoken for far too long. The snow continued to fall outside, yet inside the Sterling estate, a new warmth permeated the air, one of fragile trust, tentative hope, and the beginning of a Christmas neither Lila nor Clara would ever forget. New Year's Eve arrived like a slow crescendo, the mansion buzzing with anticipation, the Sterling estate glittering under strings of lights that reflected off the freshly fallen snow. Lila Harper moved quietly through the rooms, her senses heightened, every glance and whisper sharpening her awareness of the delicate balance she had stepped into. Clara was unusually animated, darting between rooms with her camera, capturing fleeting moments of joy and quiet interactions, her confidence growing with every shutter click. Dominic Sterling watched them both, a mixture of pride and concern etched across his face. He knew that the bond forming between Lila and Clara had begun to fill the emptiness left by Isabella's death, but he also feared the consequences. The idea that he might lose this fragile connection so quickly gnawed at him, an anxiety wrapped in hope. Later that evening, Dominic's mother, Patricia, cornered Lila in a quiet hallway, her sharp eyes studying the young woman as she chopped vegetables for the dinner guests' after-party hors d'oeuvres. "My son is planning to offer you a fortune to stay," Patricia said, her voice firm, but tinged with caution. "What will you say?" Lila looked at her, unsure how to answer. I don't know," she admitted. "Isabella was my friend. I loved her dearly, but she's gone. Life goes on, doesn't it? Clara needs a mother. Dominic needs to remember how to live. If you can give them that, I'll support you. But if your motives are money, leave before you break their hearts." The weight of her words sank deep into Lila's chest, and she nodded, a silent promise forming within her. Later, after the last guest departed and the house settled into a hushed calm, Dominic pulled her aside, his expression a mixture of relief and nervousness. "Lila, we need to talk," he said, handing her a warm mug of cocoa. The warmth seeped into her hands, grounding her against the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside. "Are you ending this early?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. "No, the opposite," he said, running a hand through his dark hair, his eyes searching hers. "Clara is changing. Last night, my mother said she actually laughed. That's the first time in 2 years. And it terrifies me. What happens when you leave? What happens to her when she loses another mother figure?" Lila's heart ached at the honesty, the fear, the desperate hope intertwined in his words. He hesitated, then pulled out his checkbook, the leather smooth under her fingertips. "Stay, not for a week, but permanently. I'll pay $4 million a year, benefits for you and your family. You'd live here, help raise Clara. I'm asking you to be what she needs, what we both need. In just 2 days, you've done what an army of professionals couldn't. She's reaching out, connecting. How can I let that go?" Lila's hands trembled as she absorbed the gravity of his offer, the impossible trust, and the profound weight of responsibility it carried. Outside, the snow continued to fall in thick, soft layers, blanketing the world in white, as though offering a fresh start. Inside, Lila felt the tremors of a decision that could reshape her entire existence. She thought of her tiny apartment, the unpaid bills, the life she had struggled through alone, and yet, she also felt the pull of something far greater, the chance to be part of a family, to heal a child's broken heart, to carve a place for herself in a life she had only dared to dream about. Dominic waited, his eyes locked on hers, silent, expectant, as if the answer would determine the shape of all their futures. Lila took a deep breath, feeling the snow-like quiet settle in her mind, and realized that the moment had arrived, the choice between staying in the shadows of survival or stepping fully into a light that promised love, connection, and a chance to belong. Lila Harper stood in the softly lit kitchen, clutching the warm mug of cocoa, feeling the weight of Dominic Sterling's gaze upon her as the snow fell in quiet sheets against the windows. The offer he had made moments ago, $4 million, a home, a family, and the chance to care for Clara, felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Her life had been one of constant struggle, each day a careful negotiation between survival and hope, and yet here was a chance to step into a story bigger than anything she had ever dared to imagine. She thought of Clara, her small hands trembling with anticipation during the Christmas morning gift exchange, the way the little girl's eyes had shone when she handed over the hand-drawn picture with the words, "Thank you." That fragile act of trust, simple yet profound, had touched something deep within Lila, a sense of purpose she had never felt before. Dominic watched her closely, the lines of worry and hope etched into his handsome features. "Lila," he said softly, voice thick with emotion, "I know this is sudden, and it's not just money. It's about trust, love, and the possibility of giving Clara the family she deserves. You've only been here 2 days, but you've already brought her back to life in ways we thought impossible. Stay, not for the money, but because you want to. Because this could be the start of something real for all of us." Lila swallowed, her throat tight. Her mind raced through the consequences, the doubts, the fear of stepping into a life that was so foreign, so filled with expectation, yet impossible to resist. Slowly, she nodded, realizing that this was not about the money anymore. It was about the little girl who had chosen her, the father who had dared to hope, and the fragile chance at love and belonging that had opened before her like a door she hadn't even known existed. Dominic stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, a subtle acknowledgement of shared understanding, of a bond forming in silence. That night, after the party had ended and Clara had been tucked into bed, she did something extraordinary. The little girl, who had not spoken a word for 2 years, lifted her glass of sparkling cider during the final countdown and whispered, "Happy New Year!" The word, barely audible, rough from disuse, sent a jolt through Lila and Dominic alike. Tears filled Lila's eyes as she knelt beside Clara, holding her hand, feeling the significance of the moment resonate in every corner of the lavish room. Dominic pulled them both into his arms, the pent-up grief, fear, and hope spilling into a moment of raw, unguarded emotion. The breakthrough was not just Clara speaking again, it was a transformation of trust, love, and the realization that a life rebuilt on care and courage was possible. Lila felt the magnitude of the responsibility she had embraced, the fragile hearts she had entered into and promised to protect, and she understood that this was no longer a temporary arrangement. It was a future. The snow continued to fall outside, soft and insistent, covering the city in white and transforming it into a blank canvas, just as Clara, Dominic, and Lila were beginning to paint their own story of healing, connection, and hope. Lila Harper realized that she had crossed a threshold, no longer a stranger at a bus stop, no longer a temporary visitor, but an integral part of a family that had been broken, yet was now finding a path toward wholeness. And in that quiet, magical moment, with the glow of Christmas lights reflecting off the snow and the soft breathing of a child who had finally found her voice, Lila knew that her life, and theirs, would never be the same again. 2 years later, the snow fell gently over Michigan Avenue, soft and quiet, blanketing the city in white and turning familiar streets into something magical and new. Lila Harper moved among a crowd of young artists, guiding them through her charitable photography program for homeless and underprivileged youth, her heart full as she watched their faces light up with the thrill of creativity. It was their first major gallery show, and the room buzzed with excitement, laughter, and the curious energy of discovery. Beside her, Clara, now 8, moved with the confidence of someone who had found her voice in every sense of the word. The professional camera hung around her neck, capturing moments of wonder, smiles, and light, her artistic talent flourishing under the nurturing presence of Lila, the woman who had stepped into her life like a miracle 2 Christmases ago. Dominic Sterling approached, cutting the ribbon to open the Emma Harper Youth Arts Foundation with a mixture of pride and quiet awe. "Can you believe it's been 2 years?" he murmured softly, pulling Lila close, his eyes warm with gratitude and love. 2 years since you sat at that bus stop, 2 years since the luckiest Christmas of my life." Lila smiled, feeling the weight of every moment that had led to this day, the frozen December air, the fragile trust, the breakthrough of a child's voice, and the courage it took to step into a family she had never known. They had married the previous spring in a small ceremony, intimate yet filled with love, with Clara proudly standing as maid of honor. Lila's mother, now in remission, had walked her down the aisle, the room bright with warmth and hope. A photograph of Isabella had been placed on the altar, a quiet homage to the woman whose memory had initially brought them together, and whose love had shaped the hearts of both Dominic and Clara. Later, as Lila guided a young girl named Jasmine through her first hesitant steps in photography, she shared the story of her own beginnings, uncertain and scared yet full of potential. "I was terrified," Lila explained gently, pointing to a photograph on the wall. "I had been at the Sterling house less than 24 hours, unsure if I belonged. But Clara saw something in me I couldn't see. Possibility. And maybe you can see that in yourself, too." Jasmine's eyes widened, reflecting a mixture of hope and determination, and Lila felt a quiet joy in knowing that her story could inspire others to believe in their potential. Later that night, as the gallery emptied and Clara shared her secret project, a slideshow pairing her photographs over 2 years with Isabella's portfolio to reveal echoes, parallels, and continuity. The final image appeared. The family together, Lila, Dominic, Clara, and baby James, born 6 months earlier. Superimposed translucently was a photograph of Isabella, the title scrolling beneath, "Love Continues, a Family's Journey Through Grief to Joy." Tears streamed down Dominic's face as he whispered, "She would be so proud. I am so proud." Lila knelt beside Clara that night as she tucked her into bed, the little girl whispering softly, "When I drew those pictures of 3 people, I was drawing Mom. But now they look like you, too. Maybe I knew you were coming. I needed you, and now I have you." Lila pressed a gentle kiss to Clara's forehead. "I'll always be here for you, sweetheart." Outside, snow began to fall again, mirroring the magical Christmas Eve 2 years prior, covering the city in a blanket of possibility. Lila looked at Dominic through the nursery window, feeling his arms wrap around her, and smiled, knowing that love had transformed their lives, not by replacing what was lost, but by honoring it while stepping boldly into the future. And in the Sterling house, once broken, a family had become whole. A family built not on perfection, but on trust, courage, and the unexpected magic of a bus stop on Christmas Eve, where a struggling woman and a grieving father found exactly what they needed in each other: love, belonging, and hope renewed. And Lila Harper, once invisible in a city of strangers, had found her place, not just in their hearts, but in a life that was hers to claim, filled with possibility, family, and a love that would continue to grow with each passing year.